Okay, I would like to call the Addison Central School District Board meeting to order. Today's date is June 12th. The current time is 6:30. Before we get started, there is a couple agenda changes that I would like to make as the first item, which we can do under open meeting law. First of all, the agenda item G, which is executive session, contract negotiations, is being removed from the agenda tonight. And then under report of the board, I'm adding an item 2, which is an action related to hiring of the new interim superintendent. And I'd also like to invite those who are here in attendance to linger afterwards because we have cake. So we're going to be celebrating Peter tonight since this is his last board meeting. Next.
His last board meeting here.
Yes. Well, isn't that all that counts? It's our board
You think
meeting.
you're getting out of him somewhere else? No.
No.
It's not looking that way.
So thank you, Chip. Okay, so now I'd like to start with the introductions. And if Lindsay, you could start us off, that'd be great.
Lindsay Hescock.
Joanna Doria.
Jamie McCallum.
Chip Malcolm.
Suzanne Buck.
Trisha Allen.
Steve Orzek.
Mary Heather Noble.
Ellen Wheelan-Weist.
Jason Chance.
Eddie Fallis.
Peter Burrows, Superintendent.
Barbara Wilson.
Will Hatch, Technology Director.
And then for admin that's here,
Matt Correnti, Director of Finance and Operations.
Heather Crowley, Executive Assistant to the Superintendent.
Caitlin Steele, teaching and learning for 2 more weeks, and principal.
Nicole Carter, Director of Teaching and Learning.
No.
That's Human Services. I promise I know what I'm doing.
and assistant
Don't you have a
superintendent.
I
title
did.
change?
That's what I was working around.
Okay.
Heather Gibo, Literacy Coordinator.
Joy Dobson, primary curriculum coordinator. Now nobody knows what we do. Okay.
It's been a long year.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next on the agenda is opportunity for public comment. And Will, could you check to see if we have any on Zoom?
All we have right now is John Flowers from Addison.
Okay. Is there anyone in the room who would like to make a public comment? Okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mary Slozar from Waybridge. I just wanted to kind of put an emphasis on the report that Heather Gibo is going to be presenting tonight. Partly because I hope that the board understands how big what she's saying is, which may not, you might not know that if you don't know a lot about literacy. And it's really a big thing. And I also want to just say that this is something that a lot of parents and especially a community, we've been talking a lot about the need to move to structured literacy in a consistent way in our district. So this is something really exciting for a lot of us. But I also want to emphasize that it's not a switch that someone just flips. And so I think Heather's report does a really great job of diagnosing the problem, really laying out how there's all the evidence is there to promote a move to structured literacy, and the amazing goal of having 90% of our 3rd graders reading at grade level in 3 years. But I also want to emphasize that I don't know how we do it, how we get there. And I think that this board is going to have to be really curious about how you support our administration and our teachers and getting us to that goal. So I hope you'll be curious in that conversation with Heather and others tonight. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, so next it's time to approve our meeting minutes. And we have several sets to approve. So let's first start with the 5/22 meeting minutes. Could I have a motion? Chip? And a second?
Second.
Great. Are there any comments or updates?
This was a regular meeting
Yeah, this one was.
That was the standard
amongst the
meeting.
many.
And I did have one, under the public comment. It looks like that Mary had provided last time. It looks like something got truncated there, Mary Heather. I'm not sure, it doesn't flow the sentence. So I think somehow when it got cut and pasted in here, we lost a few words. Okay, so other than that, that was all I had. So any other comments? Lindsay?
I noticed that there were cases where someone said yes, they weren't actually there. Do we need to make any adjustments to that? Instead of abstaining, they voted for it, or,
For the individual minutes?
yeah, do we need to do anything about that?
Go ahead, Mary Heather.
I think my understanding is I'm just capturing what actually
Okay.
happened, so that was a choice that was made and I just captured it, so I can't change it.
At this point, I don't think it warrants changing.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, I'm gonna call the question. All those in favor of approving the 5:22 minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Say nay. Any abstentions? We have Jamie. Any other abstentions? Okay. Okay, next, we'll move on to the May 23rd minutes. Can I have a motion? This was a special meeting.
I'll move to.
And a second?
Second.
Jamie, a second. Are there any comments, updates? Okay, so all those in favor of approving the May 23rd minutes, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so we have 2. Moving on to the next special meeting, May 30th. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Okay, Joanna, a second?
Second.
Steve? Are there any comments? If not, all those in favor of approving the May 30th minutes, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I believe I was not there.
Correct.
Yes.
MH. Anybody else?
Oh, Brian's not here.
Yeah. And the last set is for a special meeting on June 5th. Can I have a motion? Okay, Suzanne, a second?
Second.
Chip, are there any comments? Okay, all those in favor of approving the June 5th minutes, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have Tricia, Ellen, Lindsay.
Thank you.
It looks
Okay.
like you weren't there that day either.
So all the minutes are now approved. Thank you.
Oh, you're noted as not in attendance.
On the 5th.
On the 5th.
Yeah,
Was like
We
this.
don't have the-
Emergency one on a Friday.
we,
Monday.
I'm sorry, Monday.
So we should
So-
correct that.
Sorry, I should have corrected that.
okay, any other,
Okay, so sorry.
go ahead,
Um,
Jason.
You were present? Is that what you're saying?
I believe so, yeah.
Prove it.
What was this?
They're all already there.
Well, we can't really tell you what the meeting was about.
But it was at, the other place.
That was a Monday night. Yeah, so-
No,
That was the
Monday
ninth.
night was here.
That was
Before the parade.
That was the ninth. That's not included in here yet.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Hopefully we'll stop having meetings. Do you have what you need, Mary Heather?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, moving on to approving the ACSD bills. I'm gonna hand it off to Chip.
2 sets of bills, first one on the 30th of May. Read by Jason and I, and Jason, you read today's too? First part is the general fund of $1,098,161.56. Again, as I often do, clarifying that it's gross numbers, I just added them up very quickly. About 455,000 was related to health insurance and Benny's benefits that way. And there was 172,000 for Center for Responsive Schools, which I didn't recognize, so I checked on, and apparently it's a program, and it was paid for out of ESSER funds, according to Lissa. So that's a big chunk of that 1 million. Second is a payroll of $907,028.47. And another payroll, $594.02. And a Middlebury College Snowball from the McGilton Fund for $2,005.70. First group. Second group was read today, and the general fund of $217,375.50. A payroll of $1,126,117.81. Another payroll of $20,789.17. Another payroll of $25,342.55. I have nothing unusual or a problem, so I move that we pay the bills as read.
Second?
I'll second it.
Okay. All those in favor of, oh, I'm sorry, any questions? I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. All right, so all those in favor of approving the ACSD bills, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Excellent. At this time, we're at the report of the superintendent, so I'd like to hand it off to Peter Burrows for his final report to ACSD of the superintendent.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, well, first I'm excited about the agenda tonight. I'm excited to hear from our teaching and learning team. These two reports I think are pretty important. It's work that we've been talking about a lot. Wanted to let you all know that I've been working with our central office leadership team over the last couple of weeks to work on a transition plan. We're going to be meeting tomorrow to continue to kind of flesh out what that looks like so that the incoming superintendent is grounded. We're moving along work that we've been working on for a long period of time, and it will be easier for that new superintendent to get up to speed. I think in an interim position, you're not expecting that new superintendent to come in and get their hands way down into the weeds and pull things and push things back in. You're really looking for someone to kind of stabilize the work that's already happening. We've got an incredible central office team, and when I say central office, I kind of mean district team, helping to move the work forward. That includes our principals. Obviously, everyone in the district is part of that work, but I think we've got a lot of strong structure. You're going to be hearing a little bit about that tonight. That's really important when there's a leadership change, and I'm feeling much better about leaving, knowing that we have this in place, and the important work that we are working on will continue. So wanted to mention that. Strategic plan for equity update. That team has been working with Emma for a long period of time over the last 5 months, 6 months, and they're very close to the finish line. They are not there yet, so they're not going to be able to bring a final report for adoption by the board this month. The plan currently is for them to be working on some final edits and revisions to the report over the next month or so. They believe they'll have something by mid-July, and we'll be then bringing that to an August meeting for adoption. Once that is sent out in mid-July, the the central office team is going to be working on the admin retreat. That is on the 3rd and 4th. And we'll be bringing that draft report with them to start talking about with the principals, what does this look like in terms of our work going forward for the coming year. Some of the work that's already underway will connect to that strategic plan. A big part of the work that we have talked about related to the plan is resource allocation. We've already talked a number of times about the significance of the next fiscal year budget of FY25. And so I think the timing is perfect for that plan to be done, and using that plan as a platform to think about some of the big changes as ESSER funds go away, waiting studies coming in, and we're going to have to make some decisions around systems and staffing. That could require a significant amount of work from the board to engage with the community so that there's real understanding about the why around that. So I do think things are coming together in a really nice way right now. End of year staffing, we are doing pretty well with our hiring, and I'm meeting with some kind of final people as they're coming in right now. We have some, if you go to our website, you can see the number of positions we have posted. We have the typical, paraprofessional positions open. We have some special educator positions open. We have some positions where someone moved into a new position and they vacated their previous position, that kind of thing, like kind of ones and twos at different schools, but those aren't positions that we think will have a hard time filling, like a math teacher, for example, at MUMS. The side letter with support staff, if you remember, that we talked about, I think will, and we don't see this yet, but we're expecting that bump in pay, and especially at the entry level positions, which made us much more competitive with our neighbors, will have an impact as support staff are shopping around regionally to figure out where am I going to land? Am I going to go to, Waybridge or to New Haven or, whatever kind of thought process someone's going through. One thing I was just remembering as I sat next to Eddie here was he needs a friend. So that's something that the board will work with the new superintendent and with Principal Steele on probably in August as you get moving to find the person you're going to train. Yeah. The young Jedi.
Padawan here, it's a Padawan.
Thank you. The Padawan. Yes. So that's my report. I also just want to take the opportunity to thank you all again for graduation. It was wonderful. Thank you for the gifts and more importantly the thoughts and heart. And as I'm leaving, obviously bittersweet. It's been an amazing journey here, and this feels like home, and I think will always feel like home. And that's because of all of you and all the other people that aren't in this room. So thank you all. It's been amazing. I'm so grateful that this was my life.
Anyone have any questions before we move on to the presentations, comments?
Elsa Burrows is going to be a junior next year, isn't she?
I'll be back.
Just a thought.
I'll be back.
No, thinking about junior replacements on the boards.
Oh,
There's a Burrows on the board.
Keep the Burrows name alive at the table.
There's a whole selection process.
Yeah, she would be good, but
Do we have this is just a housekeeping matter. Do we have the remote for the air conditioning?
We're
Yes.
fussing with it,
Trying
trying
to
to
get
back
it
here.
behind with
Caitlin, I think I figured out how to turn it off, so I could probably turn it back on.
oh, there it goes.
I got it.
Okay.
I just couldn't hit the eye from the corner.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh,
It was freezing before, so.
sorry.
Okay, so with that, we can move on to the ACSD Literacy System Development Report.
No, you got it.
There are cookies if anyone wants a cookie.
These were just for me.
Those are, you can have them all or you can share them. It's up to you.
So, hello, my name is Heather Givo. I come to you today as a classroom teacher, then turned new literacy coordinator. I've only been in the position for 2 years, but I think that you will find both in my report and hopefully in my presentation that I'm very, very passionate about literacy. Has this ever worked for us when we put that in here? Yeah. Okay. Just a little bit of my background. I grew up in the area. I graduated from Virgins. After both my husband and I graduated, we went off on an expedition of following military orders around for 26 years. He was a helicopter pilot, and in doing so, we raised 3 boys, and I was a part of schools, whether I was teaching, mostly primary grades, or volunteering, or homeschooling through military transitions. I was always involved. And when he retired from the military in 2017, Vermont was where we wanted to come home to. Even after great duty stations like Hawaii and Italy and things like that. But all of our family is here as well. So we came back and I was able to find a position at Mary Hogan for first grade, and that's where I spent my first 4 years here. So I have a really good relationship with a lot of the teachers that I've been working with as well. And then 2 years ago, when this position opened up, it felt like a good time for me to try and use a little bit more of my education and see if this was a good fit. I think that it has been a really good fit for me. I've certainly learned a lot and done a lot more research on both foundational literacy and beyond. And so that's kind of where I have come from. So I have a report for you. I know it was linked in the agenda as well, so you may already have it. I'm going to give it to you afterwards so you're not reading it while I'm trying to talk. So I'm just going to kind of go through a little bit about what's in the report, an introduction to what my position looked like last year when I started this, and a little bit of the research of where we're coming from with this, and what I found in ACSD, and then also kind of where we're looking to go forward. So 2 years ago when I started, I didn't really have any idea what the position was going to look like. There wasn't a lot of information. There hadn't been anybody in my position as long as I had been here. I know that there had been someone in the past, at least 6 or 7 years ago, but there wasn't really a good manual on this. So in meeting with Caitlin, we decided to kind of I basically did a basic needs assessment of going around and talking to the principals at the elementary school. I interviewed teachers. I had been working in the classroom, so I knew a lot of, especially what was happening at Mary Hogan. I sent out a survey, Google form, kind of getting information. And what I wanted to learn was what kinds of programs or resources and materials or even practices that teachers were using. And through that, I found that there were a few consistencies, but more than a lot of inconsistencies from one building to the next. And I came in 2017, that was the first year that all of the school districts had come together. So I understood where that came from. But there also wasn't anybody in this position to kind of oversee where there could be pockets of consistency. So in that, I did a lot of research on reading models. And one thing that I want to say, and I appreciate you kind of giving me a good plug for the beginning, that was really nice, that this is going to be a lot of work. And one thing I want everybody in this room to understand is that teachers did not get most of this information in their teacher prep programs. And it still is not in a lot of teacher prep programs. So this is a really big shift in some of the research of diving in. I've tried to share a lot of that with teachers through some of my professional development, but it is going to be a lot of work, and it is a big change because when you have learned something, whether it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you are ingrained in that. You expect that your teacher prep program and the professors that you have are experts in telling you what is right. And a lot of this information has been kind of debunked, or, there's new information, there's new research that tells us what direction we need to go in. So we really want to focus on that our diagnostics and our screeners that we are using is operating from more of a preventative model so that we can really catch kids early and be able to identify what challenges students may have and be able to address that from a very early age. And so then I'll also go into some of our recommendations. So you guys get a little bit, you get the snapshot of reading models. And if you have listened to any podcasts or done any reading on literacy, you're probably going to at least recognize these terms. The Simple View of Reading was developed and released in 1986 by Goff and Tunmer, and their research led them to come up with this equation of that literacy and reading comprehension was both part of decoding and being able to take the words apart and read them, and also language comprehension. And it's important to note that in the Simple View of Reading, it is a multiply equation. There's a product. So you know that if we have one of those things that is even lacking in a little bit, then our end result is not going to be complete. And that's what we have found. So in 2001, Hollis Scarborough released her Scarborough's Reading Rote, and it really broke down both of these decoding and language comprehension into more specific things that teachers and researchers could look at and study. And so the word recognition piece is that decoding piece, that this is what we really want to focus on. There is a lot of emphasis on this early because we want that decoding to be really solid at a very early age. And around the same time that she released this, the National Reading Panel released their large report in 2000, which has their 5 pillars of phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, comprehension, and vocabulary, which you can also see here in Scarborough's rope as well. So that word recognition piece with the phonological awareness and decoding, which is the phonics and that recognition of recognizing that all of these sounds are represented by letters. There's 44 phonemes, which are the sounds of our language. There's over 220 spellings of those. So it's really hard to kind of get all of that in at a very early age, but we do a pretty good job of it. But it also, the important part with the language comprehension is really having a big focus on background knowledge, understanding print concepts or genres in writing and reading, the syntax, things like that. So these are 2 of, if you see or hear podcasts or look at research, one of these 2 is probably going to be the most prevalent that you hear, probably Simple View of Reading. In 2021, Nell Duke and Kelly Cartwright released a new kind of updated model of Scarborough's reading rope. So a lot of the terminology is the same. If you notice on Scarborough's rope, there were really 2 distinct areas. All of those little strands certainly come together to get to that meaning that we want in students. But in the active view of reading, there's more of an overlap of these. When you look at Scarborough's rope, there have been people that would say, okay, well, that decoding piece, that's what we're doing in like K through 2 or K through 3. And all that language comprehension, that's happening later. We're doing that with background knowledge and, exposing kids to lots of text later on. And the fact is that we need to be doing all of that language comprehension stuff right from the very beginning, in addition to teaching the decoding. So you see in this model, a lot of those terms are the same, but we do have some more of that overlap between what is happening in word recognition and what is happening with language comprehension. The other really big piece of active view of reading is that Duke and Cartwright brought in self-regulation and executive functioning skills and the motivation and engagement of students. Executive functioning skills have a huge impact on reading. Because a lot of students that have language-based learning difficulties also have comorbidity and difficulty with executive functioning skills, working memory, and focus, and lots of other things. So this was really important that they put that in, and it should be something that we're focusing in on at school as well. So everything that I've done, all of the research that I've come back to, all of my professional development that I've offered to teachers has been based on this model. And I always come back to this. I put it in every presentation that I have so that I remind teachers that the vocabulary that we're using here is from this model, and that the research I've tied to comes back to this as well. So in K through 5, a lot of this comes from the National Reading Panel. A lot of it hasn't changed in recent years. That in K through 5, our literacy blocks should be anywhere from 90 to 120 minutes long. I would say that overall, our elementary schools are closer to that 90 minutes. And in that 90 minutes, especially in the early grades, we're going to spend a lot more time on that phonics. And understanding that relationship between the sounds and the spellings. And another thing that is in the National Reading Panel, and I feel like that we as primary teachers have done this, but maybe not in an explicit and systematic way, has been phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is getting a lot more attention. Being able to split words into their specific sounds and being able to blend them back together. Again, it's really important to be able to do that so that then we can also learn what those letters are that, could be represented with a specific sound. So students have to be able to do that, and this is something that in older grades, if we have a student who is struggling, very often if we were to do a phonemic awareness assessment, we would find deficits in this. In the earlier grades, they should be independent reading, both choice and some assigned for 15 to 20 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes for upper grades. And a big change I think that you'll see, or that is coming through with this structured literacy, is that more of our things need to be explicitly taught with direct instruction. In a systematic, we need to have a scope and sequence that aligns with how we are moving from one thing to another so that we can identify students exactly where they have gaps and that we can address those very early on. Something else that was in, like I said, in the National Reading Panel is work on fluency. This has a huge impact on students' comprehension. If they are spending so much time on decoding and taking apart and really focusing on having to decode words, then they can't exert any cognitive space to understanding what's happening in the text. And so it slows them down. They have to reread something numerous times. And fluency work is repeated readings, and a lot of it, but it's something that overall is fairly simple to do in classrooms. Finding the time is tricky, but there's a lot of different opportunities for us to do that. As well as some interactive read-alouds, like I said, in the primary grades, we want to be sharing really rich texts that have to do with the content areas and things like that. These are not texts that our students would pick up and read on their own. We have to share that vocabulary and that rich content with them through read-alouds and have discussions and allow students to have discussions around those texts. And again, with vocabulary, we also need that explicit instruction, and our writing should be tied to this. What is really nice about our IB framework is that from about here down, all of these things can happen together. Our writing should be based on what they are reading. Our reading should be based in building knowledge around the content. So our IB units that we have been designing over the last 6 years, and I was a part of that too, in writing first grade for sure. And the work that Joy and Brandy and I are doing together now is really trying to tie in a lot of this so that our writing aligns with what they're learning in their IB units, and the more that they write about it, the more that they know about it. So this is kind of, like I said, it may not be a block of 90 minutes when you walk into a classroom, but if you were there for the whole day, you would be able to see where these pockets come out through our IB units and grading. In the report, there is a couple pages that I broke down some of the data from FastBridge and SBAC. And right now, and I know that Nicole's gonna share some more of this with you as well, but right now, overall, kind of big picture, we still have 30 to 40% of our students that are not reading proficiently. They're scoring below proficient even. So we certainly have a long ways to go. I think we're getting on the right track of some of the things that we're going to be implementing. The FastBridge is given 3 times a year as a universal screener. Early in the grade, K through 2, there are different sub-skills that can be used for both assessment, but can also be used for progress monitoring. So that's a place that we have growth. So what I saw predominantly in our schools as I was touring and interviewing and talking with people is what is referred to as balanced literacy. This came from kind of a mix-up of years of phonics that kind of got pushed away to the side with whole language in the 80s. And then there was the National Reading Panel that came out and said, yes, we really should be doing phonics. And so there was kind of this understanding, well, we want kids to have really rich experiences with text, and we're going to hand them books, and they're going to learn from being able to have those texts in their possession and looking at things. And so balanced literacy you will see some phonics taught, you might see some phonemic awareness taught, but it's not taught explicitly or systematically. Big names that you may or may not have heard of for balanced literacy and guided reading are Fontes and Pinnell. And they have an assessment, they have level readers, they came up with leveling texts. And so a lot of their level texts have been being used in our classrooms. And the disconnect between balanced literacy and like structured literacy is that even if there was some phonics being taught, the text that students were practicing with for application did not match. They're patterned, so it follows something like, there's only 1 or 2 words for early on. Only 1 or 2 words change, and it's a pattern. It's meant to really focus on high frequency words. So this is kind of what I've seen mostly in our classrooms, and we are beginning to make a shift in some of it. In structured literacy, this is where we want to move to all of the pieces. We've got some of these pieces right now. One place that we have had consistency across the district for quite a while has been the use of Foundations as a phonics program. It's been in all of the schools for decades, right, Joy? I was like, how long has it really been used, Joy? So we do have a strong phonics program. That was one place that Caitlin and I in discussions decided to start last year, of really focusing on kind of this low-hanging fruit. We have this in all of our buildings. We need to update our kits because there's a lot of teachers that don't have them, all of the pieces to it. And I've also done more training around using phonics. But in structured literacy, we want decodable text, especially in the early grades, so that students are able to use that phonics instruction that they're getting in their classroom and then be able to apply it. And that has also been a place that I've been able to make a change. It was really exciting. I presented all of this research to Caitlin, and the funding appeared. Thank you, all of you. It was a lot of money, but right now we have decodable text in all classrooms, in every K through 2 classroom. And the really nice part about the decodable text that were purchased is they align with Foundations. So they align with our phonics program. You can turn over any book and it will tell you exactly what unit in Foundations and what grade level it comes from. I feel like I have all that talking was from a different slide, but yeah. Also with the Geodes decodable texts, they were intended and created to be a knowledge building curriculum as well. So through the span of K through 2, students will explore 30 different countries. there is a famous piece of artwork that is in every one of the 4 modules per grade level. There are several diverse different types of people and topics in relationship to biographies and there's a range of both fictional narratives and prose and informational text through all of it. So that's one thing that we've done in terms of the foundations. Like I said, I was able to find out what people were missing and be able to supplement those foundations kits. And I have also done some local professional development around phonics and understanding that any program that we get is going to have gaps. And so we need to build up that knowledge of understanding what more research is around phonics and how we can fill those gaps, how we need to bump up the repetitions that students are getting with pieces of information. And then I've also been working on the scope and sequences. We started last summer with working on phonemic awareness scope and sequence. That has now been enveloped into our foundational skills, K through 5 scope and sequence, which is not quite complete yet, but we're getting there. Our scope and sequences for reading and writing, we've done a really good job of incorporating all of our language standards into our IB unit. So a lot of that is embedded in that. We are still building that, especially around writing. But that, again, like that tie of all of the building knowledge and our reading and writing together has been a joint effort with our other coordinators. And then I've also had opportunities in working with Joy and Brandy around grade level work when they have their virtual meetings monthly, and then hopefully we'll have more time with them during our early releases in this upcoming year. And then another piece that I was able to do starting last year was I was able to start meeting with interventionists in from all of the elementary schools. Basically every month our grade level teams would have a virtual meeting, and any month that they met, I met with interventionists. And it was really nice to be able to connect with them and learn what they were doing in each one of their schools. We did a book study last year, and then this year Nicole graciously said, yes, you can meet with them again this year. So I've done that again, and we talked a lot about diagnostic screeners and different diagnostic assessments in an attempt to create some consistency within our schools. All of the interventionists in the elementary schools have now had Orton-Gillingham training. We've then been able to offer that up to our special educators and a number of K through 2 educators who are willing to give up some of their time over the summer to do that. It's a 30-hour course, so it's much easier for them to be able to try and do that over the summer than to take them out of a classroom for that long. So I'm really happy that they will get that. A lot of that will, again, Orton-Gillingham will provide a lot more of that science behind reading and provide teachers and special educators. Again, now we'll have special educators, interventionists, and slowly, hopefully, get more and more of our teachers trained with that to be able to have a common language and common assessments as well. So for our work ahead, we have a lot of work to do in terms of all of our, classrooms still have a lot of level text in them, and that's not to say that they have to be completely taken out, but we do need to start supplementing. We need to start taking out some of those older books that have been in classrooms for 10 or 15 or 20 years, and we do need to supplement those classroom libraries with more decodable text, especially in the early grades, so that students are making that application between what they're learning. I referenced that we use FastBridge, and it can be used for progress monitoring. A lot of our teachers have not had a lot of experience with being able to use that as their progress monitoring and being able to use it for that data collection. So we do have a plan to have more professional development with that for our educators. And like I mentioned, that the interventionists and I have worked around some of those diagnostic assessments, and we want to be able to bring those to more educators. With that, Nicole had shared with me fairly recently that we're going to have a program called EduClimate, is that right? That will house a lot of this data so that when we have our common assessments, we can use those common assessments and then have a place to store those so that we can have conversations. It's really hard to have a conversation around phonemic awareness levels when you have 7 different assessments being used in 7 different schools. So that, that paired with a place to hold it will be really very, very helpful. And also we need to start, again, we need to be gentle and we need to kind of follow it up with the research, but we do need to discontinue some of the uses of some of our assessments that we have been using. And like I said, there's a lot of teachers that are, Fontes and Pinnell is the only thing that they have known. So we need to show them, we need to be able to give them other assessments that they can use, and we need to teach them how to use, there isn't a one-to-one assessment for Fontes and Pinnell right now. So we do need to look at what are they being able to do in phonics? What is their fluency? The oral reading fluency assessment is very, very objective, and it's a quick and easy assessment, but it needs to be paired with other information as well. And then there are some other preventative screeners. A lot of schools will use what is called a rapid automatic naming assessment in even kindergarten and first grade. You can do it with colors or objects that they know. And what it allows us to do is to see if a student may have processing challenges, because if they're going to have processing challenges, it's going to slow them down in terms of when they're learning how to read as well. So we are able to kind of, from very early on, in the first week or 2 of kindergarten, we could probably identify a student that's going to have challenges in learning all of their letters and going to need upwards of 200 repetitions instead of, say, between 4 and 20, like maybe an average student might need. So, and then one of the other things that both Joy Brandy and I have been able to do this year is to be able to do some coaching with teachers. It's voluntary, but I have to say that for me especially, this was really, really beneficial, and so it just meant so much to me to be able to have teachers that wanted to come with me and work with me for a while. I was able to, we talked and we figured out what they wanted to focus on. Several of my teachers wanted to work on learning more about geodes, the decodable text, and how they can really use that in a classroom setting. So that is also another way that we can embed more professional development in, at least with a couple teachers at a time throughout the year. It's really beneficial. So again, that's kind of our work, that some of that stuff was things that I will be involved in the coming year. Beyond that, I feel like next year, now that we have a program now that teachers have accessible for phonemic awareness, we have our phonics, we have decodable text. I want to be in every K-2 classroom next year to make sure that all of these things are happening together and be able to support those teachers. This year, especially with like the introduction of geodes, they didn't come until September. We didn't have professional development around it until October. And there were a lot of teachers that embraced it completely and tried to implement it right from the start, and there were some that took a little bit more time. So that is going to be something that I'm going to really hone in on next year. And then also to continue some of this professional development around structured literacy. I have had not a really ton of time with teachers this past year. So I hope that I have a little bit more time with them next year. And also, as part of this is also training and teaching our administrators in elementary school. Not many of them taught in an elementary setting. And anything that they may or may not know about literacy is maybe seen from an upper level as well. And so part of that is really helping administrators also know what to look for when they walk into a classroom as well. Like I said, the scope and sequences are not quite finished, but that is something that I would like to complete this year in terms of work study for especially our upper level. Because we are still seeing a lot of students in 4 and 5, 3, 4, and 5 that are struggling with spelling and things like that. So that incorporating and making sure that we've got some scope and sequence that is explicit and systematic for that word study at those upper levels is important as well. And then we also want to have some time, and we've done this through our IB units, but we haven't had a lot of time for teachers, especially say around writing. Writing is a really big focus for us. It has been a focus for this year and it will continue to be a focus next year. Of being able to look at our IB units and how the writing is being incorporated, but also to be able to see how it grows from kindergarten on and being able to do more of that vertical work as well. And then also, like I said, in terms of say FAST or the other diagnostic assessments, we have not had a lot of conversations in schools around looking at that data and how we can plan that instruction. And so we need to incorporate more of that as well. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, the information is there. I'm more than happy. Joy can tell you, I can talk about literacy all day long. So if you have any questions or would like to learn more about something, I am more than happy to meet with you and talk to you, right, Tricia?
Yes, you're very helpful.
Is there any questions before,
Sure.
go ahead, Ellen.
I was wondering, Heather, I really love the report and thank you for walking us through it. And it's really exciting, even reading the bold goal of 90% of kids by third grade being reading at grade level. And I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more how much of what you've laid out as like shifts in the work and what's being made available for teachers is sort of a, like, if you build it, they will come model of making it available versus sort of a concerted change that will be adopted over the next couple of years that teachers will have access to training in what it is, but they are sort of going to be like they have to start to move into the structured literacy.
Right. Yes, they are going. And I think a lot of that is that, like I said, I keep coming back to that active view of reading and the research that supports that. And a lot of the practices that are happening in classrooms, not just here, everywhere in the United States, is that some of that is not supported by research. So when I very early on in talking with Caitlin, she says, show them the research. It's got to be tied back to that research. So I feel really fortunate that I've had that opportunity to spend a lot of time in research, and I continue to do that. I'm always in a class or with a book in front of me or research articles or things like that. Caitlin, I think, is trying to convince me to go for a PhD, but I don't think I'm ready for that yet. So I think that supporting it with that research is going to be a big thing. And then there's got to be some accountability as well. So that's where a lot of that training up the administrators as well in knowing what to look for, in knowing how to identify where maybe some of those things are not happening. If the district decides on a specific program or resource, that there is an expectation that it's going to be used. And I hope that with more, I think there's a lot more teachers in our district right now that are seeing this and doing some of that research. I have a lot of colleagues that are in master's programs right now too, that are making some of these shifts as well. So I hope that it's not as hard as maybe imagined that to make those shifts. I also think that success is a huge motivator. And when we have, I don't know how many kindergarten teachers have come up to me, because I would say kindergarten this year using the GEODS text, they were all in. They loved them. They had them out. They were, in kindergarten, the GEODS text for the first portion of the year are made up of books that are search and find with letters, and then wordless picture books. And some of the teachers would talk about, I never knew that wordless picture books would be so engaging. And the discussion and the vocabulary that are coming out of kids without even some of that explicit vocabulary, and the discussions that are happening. And if you walked into any kindergarten classroom this year, about second half of the year, they were all reading words that had consonant vowels or short vowels and consonants. They were reading them with digraphs. So even this year, I have had a lot of kindergarten teachers say, I've really noticed a big difference We've been working on that phonemic awareness as well. They're understanding, they can blend and segment words, and now they're reading them. The texts in the second half of kindergarten are called duet books, so that there's a portion that an adult reads, a sentence or two that gives a little bit more background knowledge. And then there's a couple sentences that include mostly those CVC words and high frequency words. And we've got a lot of our kindergartners that are reading both the adult and the child part right now.
So my one follow-up question is, does that mean that the 21-22 lit programs by school chart that was included in the report, will that look more consistent over the next few years as far as the different types of?
Yes, I
Okay.
really believe that it will, as we are using more of those programs more consistently.
And that's like a really required shift that it sounds like the district is moving in, okay.
And generally, like the field of dreams approach doesn't work.
That was my concern.
Okay, I don't remember which is first, so.
Steve first.
Okay, Steve, thank you.
Just two quick questions, and you don't have to answer them extensively. We saw a presentation that Jen LaRock and the literacy interventionist did at Salisbury, and she used a very, what looked like a very powerful management tool. Is that a tool that the district is going to be going towards? I don't remember the name, if anybody can help me with that.
I don't know,
It was
well,
what?
they were, where they use it, they had fast data,
They were
right?
using
I know that the work that they were really collecting and looking at were the curriculum-based measurements of oral reading fluency. So yes, all of our schools have that. Again, like I said, a lot of teachers have not had professional development or exposure in really using that tool as a progress monitoring tool and having those follow-up conversations around the data.
Okay.
But it is a direction that we are moving.
My second question was, for a long time, fluency was seen as the do-all, be-all, end-all, and it seemed to comprehension and retention seemed to take a back seat. The fluency, is this model de-emphasizing that because?
Like I said, I think that all of those things that I had in the literacy block, I wouldn't say at different grade levels, certain things are going to take precedence. In our K through 2, we really do need to work on that phonemic awareness and not phonics. Fluency is going to come with repeated readings, even at that early age. Fluency has a bigger part maybe in the older grades, but like I said, too, is that if students don't have fluency, then they're not going to be able to gain that comprehension. That doesn't mean that we're not teaching comprehension strategies or things like that, but if they're using their cognitive load just to get through decoding those words, they're not going to reach that level of comprehension of being able to speak what they're reading. Now, that has nothing to do with what they're listening to. And that, again, is how we can have read alouds, even in older grades, if we have students that are not able to read, say, grade level text at that point, that we would share grade level text with them orally by reading with them and being able to have really rich discussions that builds that language comprehension. So that when they are able to do that reading, that then they've already got some of those strategies and ideas of, forming predictions or, thinking about what comes next and, the different parts of the story and things like that.
Yeah, I'll send you some follow-up questions on the fluency stuff.
That's fine.
Okay, Tricia.
Hey, Heather. I am curious, rather than the school board sitting here, if you had an audience of invested parents, what would you want to share with them about this process? Yeah. I'm thinking, one of our roles as school board members are being able to distribute knowledge to our constituents and be able to really pass on what's going on. So what would your message be? What do you think is important?
I think that a lot of it would be very similar. Not everything in here at that maybe a level, but I think that even as a parent, for me, I would want to know what was happening in my school and to have an awareness of where is the proof that the research is following up with what's being used for instruction. Beyond that, I actually have a colleague that's put in a curriculum grant to work on some stuff with me this summer in terms of creating presentations that could be utilized with parents throughout our schools and giving them materials. Because I think a big part of it is there is a shift of that being able to give information to parents so that they can ask the right questions about what's happening in classrooms, but also the things that they can do with their students at home. So that's a big part of that. So yes, that will come too.
Jamie.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This report is really compelling. So I guess I have two questions. One is about, I guess the first one sort of builds on what Tricia just said about, talking to parents is absolutely important. What else can the board do to support the kinds of curricular changes you want to see happen? Like some of your recommendations involve things like
A lot of funding.
yes. Yes. So that's seems like in the grand scheme of things that cost money, a lot of what you're saying here seems like high priority stuff, which I find really compelling and really important. So I'd like to hear more about that. And B, I guess, like sort of a question about where we are now, the 90 to 120 time block thing that was on one of your slides.
Yep.
How often is that happening now? And
like I said, I think that in most schools, we're closer to that 90-minute mark. We have a lot of other things happening in the
Right.
school day too. I
Right.
can't take over
Right.
as much as I would like to read all day. But so we're at least we're not at 30 or 60. We're at that lower level. But again, I think that the more that we can tie in all of our instruction around building content knowledge and, there's a lot of science and social studies that come through our IB units that is tied in with the writing and the reading. So like I said, there's a lot of that is being tied together in terms of beyond in different pockets and different classrooms, we may be closer to 120 in what they're doing, depending on what topics kids are really interested in or what those IB units, how engaging and what is going on in those units as well.
okay.
In terms of what I would want from the board.
What do you want?
Well, let's see, I'm ESSER funded, so my position is only funded through 1 more year. So here's my plug that I'd like to continue working in the district for longer than that. And I have,
This is the first of a few of these coming.
Sorry. Like I said, I'm very passionate about this, and in all of the places that I have lived and been a part of, there has always been a literacy coordinator and or coach in every school that I've worked in and been a part of. So, and I will say that as somebody that came out of the classroom recently, it was frustrating not to have somebody in this position to either turn to of going, well, how do we do this? Or what program should I use for this? Like I said, it was very different in all of the different elementary schools. So in just the 2 years that I've worked, I feel like I'm bringing a lot more of that consistency around recommendations for programs that teachers are using, the professional development that I offer. I'm trying to record or go to schools and do that at faculty meetings so that everybody's getting the same information.
Mary Heather.
So I have 2 questions. One, I'm just curious, and I don't know if you have the data for this, but I'm just curious about that 30%, 30 to 40%. Is there any more detail that you guys teased out in terms of?
Nicole's gonna talk
Just,
about that.
okay,
a little
perfect.
bit
So
later.
I'll keep that for later. And then I guess the other thing is, first of all, I so appreciate this work. It's super, super important. And I think it seems to be sort of just a broader cultural shift for our district, moving from an ACSU and individual schools
Right.
with individual climates and individual sort of cultures to, kind of bringing us all together so that all students get the same preparation and opportunities. I am curious though, we've definitely seen as a district some pushback about that. I'm just wondering if you've experienced any of that, or kind of what have been the biggest challenges for implementing this, encouraging this, because obviously it's research based. It's really important for student literacy for all of our kids. What has been the biggest challenge that you have encountered in trying to, get this launched?
I
And
would
how,
say-
and sort of a follow up to Jamie's,
Yeah.
how can the board?
I would say I haven't really experienced a ton of pushback in terms of from colleagues and things like that. I think that maybe a frustration for us as coordinators sometimes is when we do have planned professional development and not everybody's there. That makes it challenging to have that information out in an attempt to present it to everyone and then not have everyone there for any range of reasons,
But as a whole, you're finding that it's welcomed.
yes, I think that there are some teachers that, you know, I wouldn't really say pushback, or if they have it, they're talking about it behind my back, not in front of me. But I think more of it is just kind of, again, realizing that teachers were not trained this in college and that there are some really big shifts, and to honor that. I'm one of those people. I cannot tell you how many times in reading research I just went, how come I wasn't taught this? And there's feelings of guilt for all of the students that you had, and you knew something wasn't right and you didn't know how to help them in the right ways. So I think a lot of it is just being really empathetic as well, and just having an understanding that teachers are coming to this at different levels. And so the best way that I can do that is just to keep on saying the same thing, and to be in classrooms and lending a hand, and you know, being someone that they can trust that will help them do some of that research. You know, in all of my presentations, I always share, you know, all of the research. I'm sure that very few of them actually click on all of my links at the end of the time, and that's okay. But I mean, I really enjoy being able to dig into it and have an understanding of it. And so I like to share some of those things. I try to share, you know, not the really 30-page research reports, but, you know, smaller ones, so.
Suzanne.
Thank you.
And then Joanna.
I don't think there's ever anything you've done wrong to help a student learn to read unless you've ignored the student. And that's when there's something wrong. And to that effect, I think we just have to keep trying, but also the biggest piece is to make sure that everyone's speaking the same language. And I can tell you from personal experience, having a classroom teacher that didn't know the language the special educator was using, because the special educator didn't want to share her knowledge, that it became a very miserable scenario. But as long as everyone's on the same page with language and has an understanding.
And that's what I think, you know, I work closely with both Caitlin and Nicole, and I think that that is the goal that we are trying to achieve in offering some similar or the same training as well. And also, you know, having, like I said, the diagnostics that I work with interventionists, those are also being shared with special educators, and having those conversations between all of those pockets that are involved.
Joanna.
Thank you. Again, I've seen firsthand the amazingness of geodes, and I've heard of it, and I've read them, and I've looked at them. So bravo to that find. I think it's a great thing for the district to have. And I guess I just wanted to ask about the footholds in the next 3 years. Like, you have this 90% goal in 2026, and like over the next 3 years, where do you see, where do you see like reflecting on that goal and working toward it?
I think a lot of it is going to be that preventative model of being able to catch kids as soon as we recognize that there is some type of deficit, and be able to support those students in understanding, being able to use those diagnostic assessments and being able to hone in on exactly what the deficit may be. It could be comprehension, it could be decoding, it could be, you know, not enough repetitions. There's research around the number of repetitions that are needed for some of our students, especially students with language-based learning difficulties. Like I said, upwards of 200 or more of a repetition to learn a word, where there are some students that with orthographic learning of kind of hearing the sound, understanding what the meaning is, seeing the word, they can learn it in just a few exposures. So we run the gamut of what are our kids, what's the normal or what's the average repetition that a student is getting in learning a specific phonics scale. It may not be high enough. And it's hard to kind of think that it could be something as simple as that, as repetitions, but it's also very difficult to find those pockets of how you do that throughout your day. How are you using paraprofessionals that are coming in? How are you, again, collaborating with special educators and talking with them and saying, we need to do 20 more repetitions of this concept with the student here, and anybody else that walks in that classroom. So there's things like that I think that's a big part of it. Again, I think that the work that we're doing in terms of building knowledge and not waiting until they're in second or third grade and kind of learning or reading to learn, that's not a concept we want to work with. We want they're reading to learn, or at least listening to learn from the very first moment that they come in the classroom. So
Just a quick follow-up. I guess I was surprised that sort of pre-K or early education wasn't, I know that it's like K, I know that you are the district literacy coordinator and we have just a couple schools with pre-K, but do you think that students entering kindergarten at different level, do you think that can be made up with sort of targeted intervention? Or do you think
I think that there are kids that are coming from whether it's a private preschool program or one of our school-based programs, and Meg Baker is in the same office as Joy, Brandy, and I, and we do a lot of talking about that as well. And there are certainly places that it's very challenging because there are so many other private programs as well, and even our school-based programs look very different from each other as well. So, but yes, I do believe that.
That's a great question. Well, Emily, thank you so much. And this has been great. And just as a kind of a follow-up, the best way I think moving things forward is to recapturing our results. I mean, you already said some really great stuff about what kids are doing, like in kindergarten and that kind of thing. So the more data that somebody like myself could have to say, well, this is, what we've seen so far, to help really educate people and ourselves would be awesome.
Good, because Nicole's coming up. On that,
Thank you so much.
It's like we planned it, Nicole.
Because you did.
And I fell for it, right?
I go ask for another plan.
You're the plan.
Oh, okay.
Are you
You're up.
ready?
Invited up.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Like from the website.
So just to frame what Nicole is going to be presenting. So due to the impacts of the pandemic and our strategic planning, our strategic planning, which was supposed to happen a few years ago, has basically been extended to do it at a time when it made sense to do it. As I talked about earlier, we've come to the end of our strategic planning process for really this kind of the second big strategic plan for ACSD. This is essentially like our attempt at bringing kind of a year-end report of the work that we're doing, kind of where we are with some of our data. This isn't all of the data that you saw before. Some of it is related to not having some of that data from the state. So the pandemic has really messed with state level data that we collect. So for the first 5 years of the past strategic plan, we had a report that was tied to the plan, and we had a mid-year and a final year report. The last few years, we've kind of made do, and I think we called it a strategic plan report 2 years ago. Last year, we called it an end-of-year report. This is a year-end data report. My guess, and I won't be here to see this through, but my guess is that the strategic plan for equity will have assessment tied to it as well. I think that makes sense in terms of looking at the implementation, the work that you're doing, and how that directly ties to the outcomes you're looking to reach. So that's the context for this presentation. Nicole.
Okay. Hello, everybody.
What's your title again?
Well, last year was end of year, my title. I'm not Caitlin, I'm Nicole. And the title of this presentation is the year-end report. You'll notice last year was end of year. By the third year, we'll have everything called the same. So, that's gonna be hard throughout the.
Yeah, I don't know how you make that thing go.
Can you hit that X right there that just popped up?
That makes it back to. It's really.
So, the first slide is a warning. So sometimes before I bring slideshows to you all, I show them to Darcy. If you haven't met Darcy, she's amazing. She's an administrative assistant in the central office. And so I do like a test run, right, to see what, and what I learned in that test run is even though I had this slide that said, warning, this is baseline data. When reading this slideshow, you will be tempted to create a story of what it means. It's almost irresistible. Please resist the temptation. Let this data, interestingly, I did not plan this with Heather, let this make you curious. This is the first year all of this data is being brought to show you in one place. Try not to be convinced of anything, it's really hard. It's really hard. But the curiosity is really important because that's what's gonna help us get to where we wanna be. So for those of you who haven't talked about baseline data in a while, we do this because it helps us to set realistic goals. It maintains accountability and informs us, which I think has already been named here. It informs and motivates stakeholders. When people know the information, they're more likely to pay attention. It helps provide justification for policymakers, that would be you all. It shapes expectations. And generally speaking, it allows us to establish whether change has occurred. So the district, up until this morning at 10 a.m., didn't have a data collection system. I signed a contract this morning for EduClimber. So all the data will come into one software. So this is taken out of maybe 10 different systems. If there are mistakes, I will fix them. If you want more information, I'll find them, but I don't want to pretend that it's easy to gather the information right now. It's in a lot of places.
Well, one thing I want to add is,
Yeah.
board members, you can find this in the library if you didn't notice that it was there.
In the library.
Thank you.
The board pack library.
I already
Yes.
looked at it, but I
Um,
couldn't find it
No,
now.
it's in board pack
Oh,
library
board pack, yes, it is.
Because it's not linked.
or in the documents.
Yeah.
Also just links online.
You found it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so purpose of the slides, for those of you who weren't with us when this triangle was unveiled, this is an MTSS, a multi-tiered system of supports triangle that talks about the idea of most of our work being here universal for all kids and then becoming more targeted for kids who need, Heather was just talking about it, right? She said some kids 90 minutes, 20 times is enough, but another kid needs 200, and then moving up to specialized. So the purpose of these slides is to build this, we need to look at our data. So here we go. Remember, try not to make a story. Okay. Each set of slides gives you a baseline data from this year. This is all data from June of 2023. I then give you a slide that explains the data, and then a slide about how what we're already doing is addressing that data set. Doesn't mean there's not more work to do, but it's to give you an idea of what's already underway. So here we go. First slide is about school enrollment and Title I status. So again, I'm just going to show you the data. The next slide will explain the data. Same chart. This is enrollment from June of 2023. Actually, it's enrollment as of today. I double checked all my numbers. For those of you who don't know, and there's no reason you should, Title I is federal assistance dollars that public school districts receive to support students from low-income families to ensure that all children meet challenging state academic standards. That's taken right from the
federal rules about Title I. Targeted assistance, you'll notice those with the lighter blue that say targeted, means that the school has hit 30% for low income, but hasn't hit 40%. Ergo, it's between 30 and 40%. That means the resources, the dollars that we get from the federal government for Title I can be targeted only to students most at risk academically in math and or reading. That's an incredibly condensed version of what targeted assistance means. School-wide, which is 40%, is the minimum, promotes improved instructions for all students and includes comprehensive reform of the school. Targeted and school-wide changes every year. I'm looking at Caitlin because she runs the Title I grant. So this changes every year. This has been this year. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. So what are we doing with our Title I dollars? What I've tried to do is point you to where the Title I dollars go. So they go for general education, universal, and targeted, for programs and staffing to supplement what we already do. So in these 5 schools, there are additional dollars. There are additional dollars for Tier 1 and Tier 2 practices. Next, instructional plans. Remember, I'm just going to show you the data first. This one has a lot of numbers. I started with symbols, then I went to colors, then I went back to numbers. So I'm just going to give you a minute to read it. I kept the first data set. This is as of June. This is as of today.
I have a question. I had looked at this ahead of time. So like under targeted, we have percent 504 and IEP, and then we have between 0 and 15, and our percent total plans is like 28, for example, in Shoreham. So I didn't understand that.
It's a good question. The next slide.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. So same chart, same information, only smaller. So this chart shows you what percentage of students in each building need a plan beyond that universal, that big green part of the triangle. 504 and IEP plans support students who have a federally identified need for support to access the general ed. Meaning that there are criteria that are set by the federal government that are based in civil rights law for how identification happens. Just said this. The difference in broad terms is a 504 is a right to access. An IEP is specialized instruction in addition to access. This slide isn't going to answer your question, but I will.
Okay, thank you.
The last piece, this last column are EST plans. This is a Vermont only thing. Educational support team plans. These numbers are like this, and the math becomes clear between how do you get from here to here. Because in Vermont, I think it's Vermont, Caitlin, correct me if I'm wrong, in Vermont, I don't know if it's elsewhere, when the number of students is below 11, they become identifiable. And so I calculated numbers so that nobody would be identifiable even based on percentages. So in these schools, the percentage, you would be able to identify the kids. So I decided not, usually what you do is you just leave it blank. I thought it was more helpful to give you a range. The totals are different, so should we infer the difference?
Right.
Yes, I didn't think that part.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so the total maybe needs to be arranged too.
Yep.
Yeah, that was why I was
Yep.
confused. Thank you.
Okay, so for this one, for all the plans
that exists, the work is actually happening in all three tiers. Meaning the practices, programs, and staffing. So for specialized instruction, there's specialized training underway for special educators. There's professional development for new special education rules. There's staff leaders for educators. So that's what we're doing up here to address this. Tier 2 practices, we're getting more training in evidence-based practices. We're building more robust EST plans to meet state requirements, which are new this year. We're increasing specialized teacher training. We're strengthening data processes for teachers and leaders. And we're evaluating and continuing to build universal coordinated core curriculum and instruction. We're doing all of these things in response to the data.
I just wanna make sure I'm reconciling this, the percent of total plans, of that, those percentages are tier 2 and 3.
Yes.
Okay, but what you're telling us is all of this is happening for everybody.
Yes, because the work we do is about changing our systems and our practices. Our kids are okay. It's our systems and our practices that aren't.
What does that mean? I'm trying to, I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds like things are okay sometimes because then we can have.
It means that kids do well if they can. And it's our responsibility to build systems, to have practices, and to have mindsets that make it possible for them to learn and grow. And that the child's not the problem. The problem is making sure our instruction
I see what you're saying.
meets the need.
Joanna.
What does the Title I column have to do with the other three columns?
It doesn't.
Okay,
I'm trying to keep, at the end, there's gonna be a complete data set.
got it.
So I'm trying to keep a theme.
Okay.
So you now know that in this school, how many children there are, that it's school-wide Title I, and that 23% of all students are on plans. It's just to keep the thread. Okay, so this is, who had a question? Mary Heather. This is where I think the answer is gonna be. So this is the spring universal screener data. Spring means it started in April is when it started being collected, and it ended in June. It depended on what school you were in and what teacher, when it happened, but it's all in the spring. Whew. So, put notes at the bottom to help us all. Look. I'm gonna give you a minute to look at it. And then I'm gonna explain it a little. So, and we'll see if we get it right, because the next slide explains it. So this is, as hopefully you can see, K1 reading high risk is greater than 25% based on spring benchmark data. K1 reading screeners, there's 14 subtests to screen early literacy such as phonics and fluency. I didn't list all 14, I'm happy to share that information with you. Grades 2 through 5 reading, greater than 25% is red. Screening broad reading achievement. CBM, curriculum-based measures, is still grades 2 through 5, greater than 25% is red. These are, the red is greater than 25% high risk, is to screen oral reading fluency aligned with the Common Core, CRIC concepts, phonological awareness, phonics, word recognition, and fluency. Teachers and principals love the CBM. Or I should say, I love the CBM. There's a lot in there. Then we go to math. And we've got K1 math, greater than 25% risk, and that's to screen early numeracy skills, numbers, relations, and operations. And then we have 2nd through 5th grade math, which is the broad math screener with 11 skills. And again, red means greater than 25% high risk.
So there's none. So it's less than that.
Is that good?
it means that it's less than 25% of the students in that school
Okay.
are struggling.
I see.
There's no equivalent or similar CBM for math, that's like a really comprehensive.
There is. We don't implement it, but there is.
Can you give the rationale for using the quarter 25%? Is that,
Yeah, I think I give it here.
oh,
I have to be thoughtful of Waybridge and Ripton that have such small numbers.
got it.
25% was what kept the information from being identifiable. Let's see what I said. So this data is 3 times a year. This is the 3rd time this year, right? So this is, FastBridge will show you where we are in the spring of your school year. We already talked about what it shows, so more than 25% of the students screened in the spring of 2023 are likely to fall below end of the year performance target in reading. High risk, so where it's red, that means more than 25% of the students need intensive instructional support. Then, this last piece, you'll notice that for moms in the high school, it's grayed out. We did implement a universal screener this year, and our implementation was so bad that at a meeting of secondary leaders, which includes Eileen, Pam, Caitlin, Ben, Nicole, Laura, but it's like 10 of us, we decided not to show you the data because we felt like it wouldn't do anything to help anyone because there's no training for teachers in how to implement it. We've got lots of new teachers. We're not sure it's really connected to what we're teaching. So it's grayed out. The good news is, or it's not grayed out, it says invalid implementation. The good news is that starting this coming school year, we're gonna use the same FAST system for our 6th through 9th graders, so we don't have that problem again. So, most of the work to address this red actually happens in tier 1 and tier 2 practices, because this is a universal screener. So we use it for EST plans to identify needs and to design interventions. School and district leaders are implementing system and practice problem solving teams to improve tier 1. That's new for us. And we're refining our universal core curriculum. And again, what's in the arrow is the work that Caitlin and I started last year with principals and with leaders. Any questions? Here together.
How much of that work is ESSER funded work?
Much of it is ESSER funded work.
We have a couple interventionists who are ESSER funded.
Yeah, but I would say the work isn't ESSER funded. I mean, there are certainly positions that are supporting the work that are ESSER funded, but I would say like the
Transitive.
yeah.
But I think that when Nicole ended in her position, one of the things that we made meaning out of quickly was that this MTSS work is at the intersection of both of these roles. And I think that these roles are locally funded and that work will continue going forward, at least at the leadership level. And therefore you've got people advocating for what we need to sustain going forward.
I mean, one of the things that we've talked about that we've needed for a long time is we have, talking about site-based realities that, Heather was talking about earlier. If you look at our data management and the number of systems we have, some of that was related to having all these separate districts and some of it was related to the hiring of positions to like UD3 data manager and at MOMS, instead of having a data manager, it was the counseling person who would also gather some data or the principals would do it. I mean, so it has not been like systematic. So that is work that we talked about for a number of years, and this year are working to actually fill a position to help support that a current position that we already have, but kind of shifting the locus slightly to manage this in a way that we can, and that's not ESSER funded, but to be able to, with EduClimb that you mentioned, be able to access this data, talk about it, have it in one place.
Yes.
So Joanna, to answer your earlier question, what this chart begins to do is while we don't wanna tell the story of why it's happening, because this is just descriptive, we do begin to notice things, which is why I try to leave the data up. That being said, I couldn't do it in the next one because it was too clunky. Okay, social emotional learning data. Hold on to your seats. We just came out of and are barely out of a natural disaster. We've all been impacted, including everybody in this room. It's important we know what's going on. Okay. We implement a panorama social emotional learning summary survey. I should say survey. It has 6 measures. I'm going to talk about what they are. These bright pink ones means that more than 25% of the students in these locations identified that they only have some or have no strengths in 4, 5, or 6 of those measures. Now to make it a little bit more complicated, K to 2, actually let's go here because I think it says it. Grades 3 to 12, kids assess themselves. So these are our kids speaking for themselves, right? K through 2 are teachers speaking for the kids. And that's because it's a really language heavy and requires a lot of reading skill to take it. Again, why greater than 25%? Because of, I only put Weybridge, I should put Weybridge at too. We chose Panorama because CASEL, which is like the gold standard for social emotional learning in schools, is out of Rutgers, ranks it as #1 as a measurement tool. What Caitlin and I did, and I think we did it with leaders, is it's designed to help us measure, specifically to support school improvement and support student needs, right? So it's a tool designed for schools. It's different than a tool that a psychologist would use to determine whether or not a student was struggling. It's what schools can use. And we chose, again, I can't remember who was in the room, there were a bunch of us, and it was a long, beautiful meeting, the 6 areas, because they give you choices. I think there's 10 choices. And we did it based on the research. Self-efficacy, right? Do you think you can? Growth mindset, right? Do you face an obstacle and see it as an opportunity to grow? Grit, a lot of debate about grit. I'm not saying I'm pro grit or against grit. Grit was chosen, right? The ability to sort of be more like a dandelion than an orchid. Self-management. That feels kind of self-explanatory. You're all sitting there right now figuring out if you're dandelions or orchids. And social awareness, which I think also to some degree is self-explanatory. That's 5. So this means that's 6, that's 5. Classroom effort. Ooh. So these were the 6. If it's greater than 25%, if it's that pinkish color, it means that more than 25% of the students at that school said that 4 of these or 5 of these or 6 of these, they either only have some or no strength. Any questions about that?
Wouldn't we all answer those questions, even as adults, in a different way than children? I mean, and so we would come out and I don't know.
Yeah. It's a great question. I always wonder, what if the adults took the same assessments that the kids did? It is evidence-based. It is a valid tool. It meets all the requirements in terms of being a tool that you can count on to tell you how the kids are doing. So what are we doing to help the kids? So we're going to use this data to identify functional skill needs, right? So what are the skills that go along with those 6 categories?
and how do we support students with interventions and class-wide and school-wide practices. I think Chip mentioned that one of the bills was for the Center for Responsive something. I think that's our responsive classroom training, which is K-8. So that's something we're doing because responsive classroom builds the kind of skills that this data is showing some kids are really struggling with. At this point, probably most importantly, we haven't, there is the ability to hand teachers the data about their particular classrooms. We chose not to do that this year because we couldn't figure out how to train them. And data without training can be overwhelming, right? You can feel like you're failing someone. So right now, leaders are using this information to build our systems, identify professional development, and figure out how to help kids.
But the leaders have the disaggregated data by grade.
Yes, we have a lot of disaggregated data. And I think the counselors might have it too. I think we opened it to the counselors. I don't know if you're so quiet, if that's good or bad. Usually you're such a chatty bunch. Keep going. Chip.
So a third grader is answering these questions. Okay.
Okay, moving on to the high school. So at the high school, we have a small problem, which is the state doesn't report graduation rates past 2021. And we actually want to stick with what the state's doing because the data, we want to be able to have valid data that can compare statewide. So at the high school, they're looking at their 4-year graduation rates. So in 2019, the 4-year cohort, right? Those are the kids you start school with in kindergarten and they graduate after 4 years. 83% graduated, which means 22 students didn't in their 4-year. And then by the 6th year, it was up to 91% that year. Right? So of those, so we're up to 91% of the cohort, almost 10% more. 2020 was a little bit higher, and then 2021 was about the same. This huge chart is what the state provides. You can find it online. It's pretty easy to find. It's super helpful. You can also compare us to all the school districts, but we pulled the one that compares us to Vermont. And you can see there's a lot of variability 4, 5, and 6 year between how we're doing. Like this is a big difference, right? And then we were pretty consistent up here. So we're sharing this data because it's the data that we're using at the high school right now. We told you that already. And what the MUHS leaders are doing, and that's more than principals. When I say leaders, just to be really clear, I don't mean principals. I mean principals and curriculum coordinators, principals and literacy coordinator, principals and special ed directors. Am I leaving anyone out? It's a good meaty group. So MUHS has decided to focus on raising their graduation rates. So creating more alternative programming, more flexible pathways, working on culture and climate, attendance, and that's it.
Have we actually somehow surveyed kids that have dropped out? You know, to know, you know, what is it? That would be, you know, I mean, we can try to put more in place, whatever, but we could then still miss it, right? And nothing like really kind of understanding the why. Yes.
So I would say, no, we haven't done any kind of comprehensive survey, but students tend to have lots of conversations with various people in the school, trying to keep them engaged in the system before we lose them.
Right.
And so these 4 leverage points that we're looking at in order to really engage our minds on improving this cohort graduation rate are based on professional educators taking, you know, the data from that, qualitative data from those conversations, many conversations with students over many years, to say this is what we feel like has the best chance of making a big impact quickly. So the lack of alternative programming, we've seen a decline in our graduation rate that tracks with a decline in our alternative programming that is complicated by the pandemic. So that's one place that we want to engage. We know though from the research that attendance is a major issue, and we know that our attendance is really squishy and bad right now, which is very typical, but we mean for Vermont and the US at this point post-pandemic, but we mean to actively engage in very concrete ways.
Suzanne.
But the other thing, the graduation rate doesn't say, it says dropouts. So some of these students, and I hate the word dropout, because some of these students have found that MUHS, the walls of any building, are not right for them, and they go somewhere else. They might go and get a GED, they might go to another place to get their diploma, but they've left the building.
Right.
But they haven't dropped out. And I hate that term, and I can't tell you how many parents hate that term, because they really haven't, they've moved on to find something that works for them.
But they take their student ID with them, and the state tracks them. And this is the data that the state feeds back to us. So I don't know exactly how they calculate those numbers, but it should factor in if a student finishes through Vermont Adult Learning or through.
So what happens is that if they don't graduate with their class, it's a ding. But then they're added back in when they finally achieve that diploma.
A few of the students who I know who have not continued to graduation, a lot of what I've either heard about students who haven't chose to graduate or have chosen to go do other things, a lot of it either depends on these students already are interested in a certain field and they have job opportunities in this field. I haven't heard about too many students from our school who are dropping out without much of a plan. I know that, I'm sure there are some of them who do, but I do know that, like, I don't remember the name, but I remember hearing about a kid last year who wasn't going to graduate this year because they had put in line a job full-time at some sort of diesel mechanics workshop or something. So I think it might be worthwhile to track, are these students, if there is a way to track it, are these students dropping out because they don't like school and they don't have a plan? Or are they dropping out because they have an opportunity right now that to them in what they want to do beyond high school, this makes more sense for them?
Yes. Yes, we need to capture that. Thank you for doing that. So here's the work ahead. Here's all the data points together, not to create a story, but to create, for lack of a better word, a tapestry. Because the goal, right, next year is to be able to look at a year from now and all these data points. In the year after, and are there trends? Are there patterns? And we do want to get past descriptive data, right? So there's a lot I'm not showing you. I could have broken things down by gender. I could have broken things down by free and reduced lunch, much more than just showing you what schools are title schools. Could have broken it down by students on plans. There's so many ways we could unpack, we could break it down by where did a student, right? What was the student's home school as a young child and how are they doing now? There's a lot more to do, but this felt like a good starting place in terms of the basics that we collect and what we're doing to address it. So I also, in each slide, there was that triangle with the arrow. This last one attempts to capture all the current work that's underway in ACSD. This work isn't being done by any one person. There's, names could go up here. There's so many names attached to each point. And what I tried to do in the spirit of the MTSS triangle is what are we doing in Title I schools? So the majority of our money right now is for academic intervention and behavior specialists. Policies, that's you all and us working together, policies and procedures. what are we doing with tier 1 and tier 2 practices and systems? And then what are we doing with specialized practices and systems? To sort of capture and give you an idea of what we're doing this year and as we launch into next year.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Jamie, you were
No, no,
first.
okay.
So kind of going back to the literacy, and one of the things that was so exciting when we were at Salisbury was kind of that, having that data, which this is great, at this level, but also having that data with the interventionists and the teacher and being able to recognize so quickly, which is going to have a drastic impact on this, I would think. So are we putting systems, consistency in place like that? Is, like they were doing in Salisbury as part of the presentation, immediately being able to like, oh, this child, we need to intervene at this level to get them, and then hopefully it's short term and you get them back up to where they need to quickly, as opposed to waiting too long.
Yeah, so this year was the first year Caitlin and I asked all principals to be responsible for looking at all of the screener data for their schools and for the district as a whole to begin to notice patterns for systems building. Likewise, we requested and required, was it implemented with fidelity? But we did start the practice of every school leader meeting with a team, a problem-solving team, to look at their screener data and determine two things. We have like a whole fancy chart. One thing is to look at individual kids, which is what you're talking about. But the other one, so this is an interesting thing, when you look at the research about what helps kids in terms of looking at instructional data, the individual kid information is important, right? But actually the bigger bang for the buck is the systems, is noticing the patterns. And so how do we change what we're doing here to help kids? And that takes teams of adults coming together and looking at that data you're talking about, and not only figuring out what kid needs a plan, but more importantly, what are we doing that's working and what are we doing that's not working?
True.
And so I would say this is the first year every school did that. I don't think we did it perfectly, but we did it. We're on the track.
It's a start.
Yeah.
Yes, Ellen.
I would also point out, I think the other thing about that data that we saw was its immediacy. So it wasn't just that it was individualized by class or student, it was that it seemed to be done, I can't remember the frequency, but weekly.
Right.
Which allows for that immediate response. I
Right.
have to imagine scaling that is a huge
Absolutely.
challenge. But if we're gonna get to 90% of kids at reading level by third grade, maybe that's the way to get there. No idea. But that to me was what stuck out as much as anything. It was very, very, which allowed for systems, right? So it wasn't just about the individual kid.
Yeah,
It was
exactly.
about seeing those patterns in the moment and then over shorter periods of time.
Thank you, yes. Jamie.
Thank you so much. This is so much to think about. For some reason, I don't know why, I'm confused by this math thing, the 2 to 5 column where it's all white.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm confused why it's white. Like there seems to be other factors that would contribute to it. Okay. So it surprises you? Okay. All right. So.
Gotta stay curious about it.
Okay. And then my other question is.
I double, triple, like I just kept going, it's fast crunches it all.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
And tells me, and
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my other question is, the Center for Responsive Schools thing, when Chip read the bill, that was like 400.
175,000.
Oh, see, I thought it was bigger than that. Anyway, you had never heard of it before, right?
No, when I see something on a bill like that I'm not familiar with, I call up Melissa and I ask her
Oh,
the
so-
question. If she doesn't know, she finds out, but she knew right away what that was. And so, it was something I hadn't seen and it was a big number.
Is it the first time we've used?
last year we did responsive classroom K to 8 and we weren't able to get the full 4-day implementation training, and so we did the best we could to push into, because it's so directly correlated with students. Actually, if you think about Heather's slide, She had that green here that talked about self-regulation. It's really tied to that green part that leads to reading. This year, we've scaled up to 4. I'm looking at Caitlin because she wrote the grant, 4 days of, yes.
For all of our K-8 educators. It's a big investment.
It's big.
Okay,
Thank you.
Joanna and then Mary Heather.
I have 3 quick things. So related to what Jamie was saying with the mapping, it's really too bad that we can't see any months data, because then that would, I think, we would sort of have a more full picture of that column. And I do agree that this data is just a snapshot in time, so it's not really that useful right now. And so that leads me to my question is, so how is the leadership team using this data? Like, are there changes in next year's intervention staff? Are there changes in, how is the leadership team?
Yeah, that's a great question. The immediate changes are the responsive classroom K-8. The interventionists using more diagnostic tools. So looking to FAST. I just signed a purchase order today for all the teachers to be trained in FAST assessment so that they could understand not only how to implement it, but how to read the data and then how to design interventions in the classroom. So that's happening. Math Joy is leading the way on organizing us around math core universal instruction, and then we're sort of pairing up and building it from both ends at the same time. And all of that's from a year of looking at data together. What am I missing?
Well, I would just add that I think in some ways we're not honing in on just one area as we look at this data and not kind of looking at the full system. I think we're in a place now, and I think Nicole's done a good job of sharing a little bit, and Heather too, about kind of the systems that we're building. I think we're on the cusp of, with the new data system and the work that we've put in place already to outline where we're going, that we're moving away from, and this has taken quite a long time, moving away from the siloed realities in some of these areas and we started that with IB, right? I mean, IB was the beginning essentially of building a system, and it's only one part of the system. You know, people think IB is everything. It's actually only a small part of the system. There are all these other components that we spent time building that framework, but we have realized over the last number of years that the system of services that we had connected to that we had done like bits and pieces. We hadn't done a wholesale comprehensive approach. So I think as we're looking at this data, I think in the future, once that system is fully developed and everybody's aware of it, I think the response to your question would be more targeted around, well, because the data is coming back in this one area, this is where we're going. Right now, we're just really getting foundational system in place.
Joanne, EduClimber is it's a warehouse for data, but it's also a data mining tool. And I think that's kind of the key, is to be able to mine up data.
Once we understand it, we can show it to you.
Sorry, Mary, I do have one.
You had 3 questions.
No, ask
So I
your
guess
one.
I'm going back to that original question of that Title I column. And so that's really essentially funding, right? Because the system seems to be comprehensive, all of the schools. Like, responsive classroom, you're not just saying, Ripton teachers get to go to responsive classroom, or Rittenberg teachers. It's all of the teachers, that's foundational. And so that title, I guess I just am curious how that plays into the whole, is it the funding from those schools, they don't have to be at that, they have to be at that school? like Title I funding has to happen at those schools.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right.
But if you're not gonna not notice corn walls, red
Not gonna-
blocks and not off, right? So
Right.
like,
Right.
okay.
This is an important piece for two reasons. There's additional funding, so sometimes there can be services there that aren't in other schools. And that's, sometimes people feel like the whole story isn't being told, so it's important to
Yeah.
name that.
Yeah.
The other piece is when we move away from descriptive data and we get more into some more analysis of data, it's an important conversation we're gonna probably have at some point. You're gonna wanna have about the connection between living in poverty and educational performance. And so it's important to be aware, although this may shift next year because it's yearly. The other thing is for IEPs, which aren't broken down, you don't know what percentage is 504 and what percentage is IEP, that comes with another funding grant, right? So this should actually be another color or something, because this is additional monies that differ school to school based on your percentages.
Mary Heather.
Well, first of all, Nicole, thank you for sort of naming the thing that I think we're all sort of seeing. I think clearly, from my perspective, it shows an enormous need in literacy, obviously, that we need to be investing in addressing that across the district. But yes, that there is, my curiosity is certainly piqued here in terms of the layering of living in poverty and the impact to our students, and therefore our responsiveness in terms of our resource distribution to the students with the highest need. And just looking at the percentages, we're looking at these schools and 43% of kids at Mary Hogan and 43% at Salisbury, but Mary Hogan has 368 kids.
So that's a lot of kids.
So it's a lot more kids, even though it's the same percentage, it's a lot of kids. And, just looking at the significant need in some of our schools, I just think, this is pretty eye-opening, I think, for us as a board to really consider moving forward, like where the need is. And I guess the other question I just have to ask, when we're looking at some of these smaller student populations and, giving percentages, I just wonder from a data perspective and a data analysis perspective, like, it's just a challenge to draw a comparison from a school with 93 kids versus a school with 44 kids and have this percentage be meaningful data. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not a big enough data set. And if you can't report real percentages because it's identifying, then how are we even able to evaluate? Because the data is not, I don't want to say it's not valid, but it's problematic because we can't report the actual percentage. I mean, that's just a problem. I think that if we're really going to take a good hard look at some of these, realities that our students and families are dealing with, we have to be able to look at the reality and talk about it in an open setting. And it just is, it's problematic. I guess I'm just going to put out there that it's problematic for me.
We're meant to be curious but not conclusive about this, right?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I guess I'm just saying, if we're looking at percentages and looking at data, and we really want data-based decision-making to happen, then we have to be able to report real data. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Look at the counties.
So in the interest of, sorry.
Okay,
No, Jason, go.
okay, Jason,
In
then Suzanne.
the interest of curiosity, given that the threshold was greater than 25%, would it be possible to see the actual percentages? Because that's anywhere from 100% to 26%, right? So you might react differently if it was 100% of students struggling versus 26%, right?
I love that you're naming all the things I struggled with putting this together. Yeah.
But Right, so, but like if we had, say 50% were at high risk, that's not identifiable. Could we not see that number and see those numbers in those red blocks?
We can definitely have a conversation about other ways to look at the data. For this presentation with broad strokes, but what you're asking for is easy to get.
Maybe even starting across the district, not on an individual school, but
Yeah.
as a.
And I chose not to do that deliberately also, because I felt like that was gonna flatten things.
True.
Like.
No, you're
I
right.
mean, there are pros and cons on every level, to be honest.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Are there ways other districts have found to have these conversations in a way that doesn't make information identifiable?
Right.
It's a good question. I think that's definitely one we can reach out and ask.
Suzanne.
Well, I was just gonna say that having seen other districts' data, when the numbers get too small, that's a cutoff point for almost any district. Because you get too low and people automatically can say, oh,
That's so.
there's 10 kids in this grade, and you're saying that 7 of them are on plants, and I can tell you with 7 of those.
Right.
So it's, it's personally identifiable information that when the numbers get too small, you just can't do it, and even the state won't do it either. They'll just clump.
Right.
Because, I mean, you'd have to have some place to cut off, but I mean, the other thing is that even if we don't know the exact numbers, we can still see that there are very interesting things that pop out. And that there are pieces that we need to work on district-wide.
Yeah, for sure.
We don't necessarily need to know how narrow those bands are or who the students are.
And if I may be so bold, and that there's work already underway, right? Imagine doing this presentation and I didn't have any of those arrows saying what we're trying to do. May not be to the end point, but I would say every single leader is digging in deep.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now we have the discussion on the student activities fund.
Yeah, I just was talking to Matt about that because it really should say FY22 audit.
Oh,
But that's one of the things we're gonna talk about. I'm not sure how that got titled.
I was talking to him about that.
Okay.
During we brought the full financial report to the facilities, to the finance committee last week. And so if you're looking for the full financial report from FY22, you'll find it in the meeting minutes and meeting materials from that meeting last week. There were no significant findings in that audit report. And I think that, that started a conversation about student activity funds. I think that's how it wound up here. But the intention was to sort of bring an update forward about the.
And we should load that audit into the library just for ease of viewing.
If anybody wants to read it, it's very long.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they do have findings at the end, nothing significant. Although the student activities has come up in previous audits. So
It is a perennial finding.
I'm happy to chat with you for a few minutes about it. So the student activities funds exist across the districts much in the same way that the sort of vestigial systems that we've just seen in data collection exist, which is over time they were created by different people in different ways. They're called different things. Not all schools have them or use them in the same way. Certainly there's a big difference between how secondary schools use student activities funds and how elementary schools do. At the most basic level, the special revenue funds that have revenue sources outside of the normal way that we take money into the district, so that could be, concessions at a football game or gate tickets or, car wash or a parent group, anything like that. And then as far as expenditures go, student activities, as the name suggests, athletics, clubs, other curriculars, purchase services, purchases of equipment, food and beverage, things like that. So historically, those have sort of existed in this gray area where the input and output of funds was overseen by administrators at the building level. I think that the pros of that are that the funds are easily accessible. So there's no checking account, so payments can be made relatively quickly in small amounts to different vendors, and it kind of keeps grease on the wheels for some of these small transactions that we have for the course of business. However, it's popped up on previous audits. It wasn't actually flagged on this one because it's a gray area that kind of exists on our books, but not totally within central control. We're working on, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to get the full reconciliation from the schools of those funds and go through them with our team to kind of measure the usage and systems that each school has in place this year as we figure out our next systems. But long story short, there are a couple of main things. Payments to referees. We've just started using Arbiter, which is an automatic ref paying service that's going to streamline a lot of those and help with that. We're looking at turning to a weekly pay cycle for student activities, so that if we were to bring those into our normal requisition system and sort of it's called the red tape that goes along with making a purchase through our central accounting, that reconciliation and checks would be cut at on a weekly basis, so speeding that process up for some of those smaller transactions. And then possibly looking into some debit or credit cards, which would, again, give us some more tracking. So those are three things that we're studying as we the activities funds this year. But as I said, our auditor gave us a clean findings letter this year, and hope to be able to do that again.
Thank you.
The finance committee wanted to speak on that, just to keep us informed. It's not as simple as it sounds, so it's, because there's some that are very small and some that are quite large.
Haven't seen some of those.
Do you want me to just keep?
Yeah, why don't you
Okay,
keep
yeah.
going?
Okay. So next is an action item approving the tax anticipation note. This happens every year as we have to borrow until we are paid by the state. Matt, you want to?
Sure. Yeah, so the tax anticipation note, as Peter said, in September, we start having to pay bills, and sometimes there's a delay in between when our bills start coming in and when the state starts funding us through the ed fund. In the past, we've had to dip into this as a reserve that we draw from in anticipation of those state tax revenues. Last year, we did not need to draw from the fund at all. Just again, it's based on timing, and it's kind of hard to predict when we're going to receive funding and how that's going to tie into the bill pay cycle. But it's there as a backstop, just so that we don't run into any events where we can't pay our bills and meet our financial obligations. So it does require board approval. It does need to be recorded in the minutes for the meeting, and so that's the action item that we're hoping to bring to you tonight. Our bank approved amount for this coming fiscal year is $3,125,422. That's going to be borrowed at an interest rate of 3%. Just a safety blanket.
Yeah, and, we don't determine, we didn't ask for 3 million, that's determined by the agency, well, the bank. It
So we
gives
send the bank our
Right.
cash flows, revenues and expenditures month to month, and we plug it into their formula. Come up with that number.
And the interest rate is only paid on when we draw on the line. It's not on the whole $3 million all year long. It's only
Right.
if we use the line and only the time that the money is out and we have not paid
Like
it
the
back.
line of
So
credit.
it's not,
Can I hit,
I move we,
thank you.
approve the note as described in the memo ordinance.
You got it? I could read it if you need me.
Go ahead.
Approve a $3,125,422 operating line of credit from the National Bank of Middlebury due no later than June 30, 2024, at an interest rate of 3%, and authorize the treasurer, business manager, and assistant business manager to borrow against the line of credit as needed on behalf of the board.
I'll second.
Any discussion?
For those that don't understand this process, this is something every single board across the state does, just as a way of helping themselves to be able to pay bills and take confidence.
Right.
Nothing just new to us.
Thank you, Suzanne. Any other discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, it's approved, and I'm not gonna read the whole thing again.
I'll just say that I think Mary Heather will need to deal with that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll
she
make sure
can,
to
she'll,
the exact
she can cut and
language in
paste it.
I've got it right here too.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, it's all, oh,
Thank
I
you.
got it, thank you.
thank you. Excellent.
Professional appointments.
Yes, please. Yes.
You can take it away.
Yeah, sure. So in board pack, there is a list of professional appointments, and we need to approve those. Suzanne?
I move to approve the professional appointments and transfers.
Thank you. A second?
Second?
Okay. Any discussion?
yes.
Steve?
Yeah, so under Cornwall, Ripton, Salisbury, Hazel, Jones, the position is school.
That was
She's
my
doing
question.
everything.
Okay, so
Yeah,
she's
I
taking
saw
over
that and I was
those
like, what
three
is she
schools.
doing?
I see.
Yeah.
Could we get a little bit more information?
School
about that?
nurse.
School nurse, so
Nurse.
she's
We're missing
currently
nurse.
employed in
I
a
see.
1-year only position, and that's gonna become a permanent position.
Oh,
So it's just say school nurse, not just school.
It should say school nurse.
Yes, I assumed that.
Nurse was implied, Steve.
Any other? Okay, all those in favor of approving the professional appointments and transfers, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Seeing none, it's approved. Thank you. Okay, next, moving on, report of the board. The first item is discussion committee updates. There was one listed, finance committee update on transportation and auditor RFP.
Right, we'll let Matt take care of that. We discussed all this at finance committee and it was being brought to the board. So.
Yeah, like Chip said, we're just reiterating what we talked about last week in a shorter form here for anyone who wants an update. I guess start with the auditor. We were due to go out for a bid on auditing services. It's a 5-year contract. We received 2 bids, one from our current auditor, which is R.H.R. Smith out of Maine. The other bid was from a local Middlebury firm, Tom Telling. And a big delta in price point between those 2 bids. I think it was $42,000 a year fixed rate for R.H.R. Smith, and then 52 variable by 2,000 a year for telling, so, and I might not be exactly right on those, but.
It's about a 56 median.
Yeah, so ends up, long story short, we're leaning towards RHR Smith, or we've selected RHR Smith as our auditor. The price delta was significant, as was the level of experience with eFinance Plus, which is our financial software. RHR does a lot of audits. There's sort of a, I hesitate to say like the McDonald's and auditors, where they're pumping through a lot of different schools. And are very familiar with our platform, telling, and has far less experience, like no experience in e-finance, so that was a deciding factor as well. So we did take a look at both, the merits of both, and didn't just knee jerk at the price difference, but at the end of the day, lower price and more familiarity with our system is what sent us to our job. Any questions on that before I switch over to transportation?
Suzanne?
I was just gonna ask, do you need a motion to accept that bid?
I don't believe so.
Yeah. It says act, oh, no, there's no action.
Well, it's just that
That
it's,
should come back to the board.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
I've done that in the
Yeah.
past.
Yeah, no,
because
that
of
should
the
come back.
dollar value.
That should be on the next meeting.
Okay.
Oh, and the other thing that we discussed in the meeting that kind of wanted to point out was that our HR has a lot of experience and pretty broad depth of knowledge considering the position of an interim superintendent and a fairly new business manager, that we wanted to go with a company that has a lot that we can ask questions of. So.
Yeah, and furthermore, because of that price delta over 5 years, if next year with an intern, for instance, there's a need to bring in a financial consultant to help shore up, we'll have that extra money. So there's a strategic one there.
So that needs to be an action item. I thought it was gonna be tonight, but I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'll
Okay. And the transportation?
Transportation, also out for bid this year. We received one bid from our current provider, Texas Transit, STA. What's different this year is for the first time, we combined forces with the other two Addison County districts, Mount Abe and Addison Northwest. And under the moniker of the Addison County Consortium, we went out for bids, thinking that maybe our strength in numbers would attract some bigger fish. We got a few nibbles, and no bites, obviously, other than Betcha. From those nibbles, we learned that 18-month lead time on equipment, really shallow staffing pool, trouble finding reliable drivers. Honestly, the same environment that we've seen for Betcha is affecting everybody who could be a bidder right now. And so I think that the lesson that we learned is, we need to get our RFP out with a 2-year window of opportunity for people who might be trying to scale up or come into a market, to give them a chance to realistically have a shot at procuring equipment and drivers in a manner that would allow them to do this. And that we could also, that we needed to do everything in our power to sort of shorten our new commitment to Betcha, so that we didn't lose any momentum with these other people who did show some interest. So the tricky part about being bundled with the other two districts when it comes to shortening our commitment was we couldn't go through the traditional pathway of contract extension, because those other two districts are already on contract extensions. There are rules saying after a certain amount of years, you can't extend your contract. Otherwise, people would just continue to extend, and there would never be any renegotiation.
Yes, it'll be the same. It'll be the same. We're not voting. on
No,
this
Yeah.
tonight.
both of these will be acted on.
I
in
will
the
make
next meeting.
one point though, sorry, Chair.
Go.
And the committee felt that it was not unreasonable, because we're dealing with monopoly, basically, that in a very, at least gross way, that the districts, the three of us, would come together, the business people in those three districts, and put together not some detailed plan, but something, if in fact those districts decide to develop their own transportation, okay, what would it cost? Even if it's unreasonable to comprehend it, we felt it was really important to have that as a reference point, all right? None of us feel, at least a few of us, maybe not none of us, that, this could be accomplished. Yes, there's a lot of districts that have run their own systems, but they've run them forever, okay? They haven't had to develop a new system. So, in any case, business managers were tasked with that. At some point, there was no time frame, but I think we, as a board, just need to have an idea, Probably be many, 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 many millions, but anyway.
No, and I think that the idea of putting together the framework of a business plan for a countywide bus company is a good productive use of this first year. So what I was gonna say is, we couldn't negotiate extensions because we were hornswoggled on that.
It's a good word. It's a good word.
We shrank our RFP down from 5 to 3, so now what we're looking at is a 3-year deal with Mitchell. 5%, 4.6 for us. The other kicker is that we already paid our dues and got our rates up. Mount Abe and Addison Northwest were both looking at 25 to 35% price hikes, and so we had to do some renegotiating of that so that their budgets didn't fall apart. We've just sort of maintained our 4.6 throughout the negotiations, so we're going to be 4.6, 4.5, 4.5 for our increases, which are pretty humane.
This will be voted next time too.
Okay.
We,
Ellen?
Do you have more, Matt? I just.
What did your question? Well, I remember what else.
You mentioned that a 2-year lead time seemed more advantageous. So does that mean that next year we would start to think about putting out a new bid?
Correct, so it's wait a year to go back out.
Yep.
In that gap year, while we're waiting, is when we discuss, instead of just sitting on it, potentially working on some business planning for what, so that we could potentially come in as another bidder with our own homegrown bus company.
To clarify though, we would have to be ready, prepared to award the bid 2 years in advance.
Right.
To give companies time to buy equipment, to fulfill
Wow.
the bid within 2 years.
So like 6 months we need to start. There would, okay.
It's pretty complicated.
But, I was just at a business managers meeting on Friday and talking to the business manager from South Burlington who does operate their own bus company. And he was banging his head against the table saying, I can't find drivers, I can't find equipment.
Yeah,
And
that's so
man's
proud.
on my desk every morning and, it's going around the table, it was everyone thought the grass might be greener on the other side and everyone has brown grass. So.
That's why I said.
Not a lot of green out
Even
there.
if it was not reasonable.
Yeah, so that was very nice bit of perspective. Another business manager who I spoke to who has 26 years of experience in New Hampshire before coming to Vermont, he's in Woodstock now, said he's got one of our potential nibblers, which is a company Butler's bus out of White River Junction. He said that they're the worst bus company.
Oh, no.
So, again, it's like, we were so excited that they might bid for us, and then you talk to somebody else and it's the same headache that we're all, thinking about with regards to our provider. So again, it's it's a cautionary tale that, what might be green grass to your imagination might not work out.
Okay.
And some of this is also point in time right now. So, investment in your own, like a countywide bus system during the current labor shortage has a certain impact in 5 years, 10 years. And you've got to look out like 20, 30 years, right, in terms of this kind of investment. So I would imagine that would be kind of part of, and of course you can't predict, if things will get easier or not, but sure that'll be part of it.
And you gotta, finesse capitalizing that within the greater, bond initiative.
Steve?
So, before anybody gets too excited about a regional bus company, we got our fingernails pulled a couple of years ago, and Addison Northwest and Mount A just got theirs pulled out, so they don't have any capital to throw into this, and they won't be able to recover for a little while. The spitball estimate was we have 50 buses running across the 3 districts. To set something up would be roughly $1 million a bus. That's a $50 million commitment just to start. So that's pretty significant. And if you think it's going to get divided over 3 districts, not really, because we have the majority of the transportation needs, and they probably can't capitalize right now. So if we're talking about a regional bus, which I am a huge proponent of,
I mentioned because
it's not going to. Yeah, I know. It's not going to be for years, if not decades.
Ellen?
I just want to make sure, creating our own bus system aside, it sounds like in 6 to 9 months, we're going to need to put out a new bid.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Thank you.
And target that bid so that the people that, the companies that have shown some interest, who have said, gave us the feedback that we need more lead time, here's your lead time, go.
Okay. Okay, Lindsay.
I did not read through the whole thing, it's like very, very long, but I tried to kind of review it all, and I had a few questions while we're at this stage. One of them was one of my questions is Appendix E. Commitment to fleet electrification. And I question that. I did a little bit of research after a different meeting that we had where it came up, and I'm just curious how this got into the document, because it doesn't seem like it should be on our radar with the time, like the duration of the contract and the expenses involved and the details about electrification. So.
Sorry. Do you want me to just talk about it?
Well, must that be in the contract? It seems like a special interest group, and it doesn't seem like it has a place in our contract.
So the commitment to fleet electrification is a progress report that the bus company would be required to provide every year that talks about their efforts towards electrification. We didn't have a lot of leverage over them, obviously one bidder, right? So, and we knew that we were, probably not going to have a ton of bidders, and so we didn't have any way in the contract to say, hey, listen, we're gonna pick you over your competitor because you've got more electric buses. That just wasn't gonna be realistic this year. But when we wrote this, it was for 5 years, and we said, going into a 5-year deal, and now it's gonna be 3, but 3 or 5 years, it would be nice to at least get a progress report from the company every year that details their progress towards electrifying buses. They can say, we didn't do anything this year, and it doesn't hurt them at all. It doesn't, affect the contract, but it does give them an opportunity to go on the record saying, hey, we're working in other markets to electrify our fleets, but because the hills are so steep in Vermont, we're not doing anything in Vermont because the batteries die, or it's too cold, or whatever it is. But it just starts to set up a history of accountability from the company towards electrifying, if they're not there yet, the steps that they're taking towards it.
So it's really just a progress report there. We don't perceive there to be like pressure to move in that direction if it's not cost effective.
No, they're entitled to run their operation however they want.
Okay.
We, in our RFP, said, one of the things that we would like to see is what's your commitment to electrifying your fleet, and can we check in with you on that every year?
I had another question about, is there language, I couldn't find it about, like after, with all this equity and stuff, a commitment to like a broader time frame, like after school busing. I saw different like special events mentioned, but are we gonna try to address the equity issue and offer all students a ride if they choose, even if they're a mile away from the school? And, are we gonna try to make any progress with the after-school late bus thing? I just couldn't find it when I was going through the document.
I think that the most important thing is that we can add or subtract if we need to. And so we've got rates there that are sort of like per bus rates for the whole year. Those are pretty static and not gonna change, but the things that are a lot more dynamic in terms of what we pay and what our needs are the athletic and co-curricular buses, and late bus would kind of be in that same category. Mount Haven for Gens also pay for transportation to the career center, and so they have that as one of their rates that they have to deal with too. So the ability to be flexible is in there in that agreement, and it's sort of on us to figure out what we want to do. And then we just say, hey, but it's also on them to say, we can't provide that service for you right now because we don't have a driver. And that's something that we're also struggling with, and other districts are struggling with, where I've heard about sporting events that get canceled or co-curriculars that get canceled because of driver shortages. Nobody to take the kids. Paying for a bus to take kids up to a game, and then paying for the driver to come home, and then paying for a different driver to take the kids from the game home and drop them off, and then paying them. So we're paying for 4 legs, but we only had kids on the bus for 2. A lot of those things are really just what can the company do with the resources that they have at their disposal to find solutions that get us what we need. And the contract is able to withstand all of those.
Good. Thank you.
Is that my 4? That's my 4 things.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
So we have one other action under the board, and it's related to hiring the interim superintendent. And so I've asked Mary Heather to put together a motion for us.
Yes, sorry, gotta find it in my pages.
Sorry.
All right.
Need a drum roll or anything, or?
Yeah.
So here- Well, here's what I've got, and hopefully this will be sufficient, but I move to hire Tim Williams as the ACSD interim superintendent pending signature of the contract and final approval from the Vermont Agency of Education. And I guess that'll be the motion, and I have more to add when we get to discussion.
Okay, and a second? Awesome. Any discussion? Go
Yes,
for
I
it.
have some things to say. I just want to put some reasons on the record as we're required to do. As we all know, the board identified 3 priority criteria for this position, including experience as a superintendent or interim superintendent. Tim Williams has both, most recently here in our very own backyard with the Hannaford Career Center. The second priority criteria was strength in developing and overseeing a district-wide budget. Tim Williams has at least 8 years of experience with budget development as a superintendent or assistant superintendent, managing budgets ranging from $4.8 million at the Career Center to $64 million at his most recent full-time superintendent position from 2015 to 2023. And of note is his recent work with the Career Center to include preparation for a bond request for capital improvements. And then finally, the last criteria that we specified was proven strength in leadership and unifying staff. Tim Williams has 7 years of superintendent experience in districts of similar or larger size, some of which immediately followed tumultuous leadership. Dr. Williams has demonstrated ability to stabilize an organization in the wake of such challenges, including at the Career Center. He's familiar with the ACSD community and can assist the board in helping us to find a permanent superintendent to help our district reach its highest potential. So for those reasons, that's why we're recommending hiring Dr. Williams.
Excellent. Any other discussion? Yes.
I would just add to that, I don't think any of us considered that there's a need for stability in ACSD because of turmoil so much as tremendous leadership change.
Right.
And that was,
Yeah.
that was the main
Right.
thing that
Agreed.
Tim's experience was appealing for.
Thank you, Madeline. Are we ready for the question?
I'd just like to quickly thank
Yes.
the administrators and folks who participated in the interim search process.
Thank you.
Their input was invaluable.
Thank you, Jason. So are we, did you have a?
And I also in the minute should like to thank both board chair and Mary Heather for the exceptional work they have done on this. This has been a very complicated and at times frustrating process since March. And all of us have not done anything compared to what they've had to do to figure out a lot of it. Suzanne too has been involved, but it's, I think we owe them, and the community owes them gratitude because this was complicated and was also extremely timely and that we had to get it done. So thank you.
Appreciate that. So, are we ready for the question? I'm gonna have you read it again,
Sure.
since I'm not gonna say all the right words.
Yes, and can you all just remind me who seconded it?
Joanna.
Thank you, Joanna. Okay. So again, all in favor of approving the motion to hire Tim Williams as the ACSD's interim superintendent pending signature of the contract and final approval from the Vermont Agency of Education.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those, anyone opposed? Any abstentions? We have an interim superintendent now pending contract signature and also approval of AOE. We have initial AOE approval. You know, the process is once we have, now the next step is to do an official letter that offers him the position in addition to working the contract with him. And that'll go to the AOE and then they'll do the background check. And I've been working with Tim on the contract. I've also gone one iteration with our lawyer. So I think we'll be able to finish that up pretty quickly. Excellent. Yay! Thank you. And do we want to mention, kind of, it's almost other business, about the community meet and greet that we are.
I think we'll just mention that we're working on scheduling one so that we can
Yes.
do a formal introduction to our community and
Yes.
be in person with hopefully a Zoom component so that folks who can't be there can still participate. So
Exactly. So keep your eyes open for that. Okay. Moving on to other, is there any other business? Mary Heather?
I just want to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Burrows for
Thank
his
you.
10 years of service. And it's just been a real pleasure working with you over these past couple years. I mean, as a volunteer and also as a board member, you've brought a lot of positive changes to our district. And I just want to say I personally appreciate a lot of the changes that we have had to face as a district are things that ultimately kind of are coming at us from a state. So it's been, I think, a real benefit to ACSD to have gone through some of these changes before being forced by the state. And I really appreciate that aspect of your leadership. So we wish you well, we'll miss you. And be well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other?
You're
you're welcome to come back to any board meeting at any time.
I'll be
As a
a
parent,
invitation.
you
Open
can come back
invitation.
as a parent.
I'll be a parent.
Yeah, that's right.
I think we appeared on Zoom one time.
Yeah.
You got Peter Burrows here.
Yes.
So your public comment.
That'd be kind of
Yes.
a trip, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, that'd be.
And Chip,
Just one other comment too, I've been on the school board a long time, and as I mentioned at the meeting back, I guess it was the meeting when we accepted your resignation. I said I worked with a number of superintendents for sure, and two of them, and you and the other one that I worked with were the best as far as planning, as far as depth, as far as personality, as far as leadership. And I think we will miss you a lot, and I think we will hopefully be able to find someone who will perform in the same way that you have. But I think that is going to be very difficult, and we hopefully will have go the good effort starting this fall to do that. So we wish you well in Milton. Be a different place. My daughter taught there actually for 3 years, so she liked it.
She's not there anymore, right?
Thank you very much.
excellent. Well, and I spoke Saturday, so I'm not gonna,
Yeah.
belabor it, because but there's cake waiting. So, any
Excellent.
other comments?
I did want to make one other
Okay.
comment. I did admonish the board for not being there at graduation last year, and I would like to congratulate them for the wonderful turnout that we had at graduation. There were a lot of board members, or most of the board members were there, so I think that reflects well on our response to that.
Thank you. That was good. Okay, I think it's time for a motion for adjournment.
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Awesome. Let's have some cake.
All right.
Jamie, it was like you're just waiting to jump on that.
That's right, that's right.